Hello, my name's George Logan. I'm the director of the Living History Village, which is normally at the Game Fair here at Shane's Castle. But due to the COVID, unfortunately, once again, we've been left on the shelf and we've had to stay at home. So I've gathered at my farm here, socially distancing a few of the groups to show you what would have been possibly on display. Well, thank you for coming along. At least the sun's out and we've got a good dry weekend for the job.
Thank you, George.
Just for the benefit of the people looking on, explain who you are and what what you do in the living history world.
Yeah, so we are the Sons of Ivor Living History Society, and we are a living history group based on Scandinavian warriors that came over in the early 10th century over to Ireland. And as well as doing living history, we're also a fighting team. So we fight two different styles: Western style, which is a more gentler type of fighting, but then we also do Eastern style fighting, which is full contact steel armour.
Yeah. Nobody realises just the expense that goes into this hobby.
Yeah.
And you're always trying to get things absolutely authenticated the way they were, based on fines and stuff. So your armour and stuff is just not going out and buying £20 worth around in the sweet shop. Sure, it's not, or the toy store.
Our group is very authenticity is very important to us. So everything we do, everything we get, we try to base off archaeological finds. And as well as that, we try to make as much of our own kit as possible and as authentically as possible, because it's the best way to learn, So that's the shields, the scabbards, our clothing, as much as we can learn and then pass on to the public, the better.
Well, that leads me to the next question. The public obviously get a great benefit, especially our younger generations, and I know schools has visited and you do public events all the time. Do you find a big interest from the public?
Yeah, so one of our main displays is actually archaeological finds of kids' toys from the time. So the kids love coming and doing the boat race, and it's brilliant because we're showing them that there was kids, they had fun, It wasn't just all warriors, it was, all the society of the Norse, and they love it.
Yeah, like so many groups that come out with Napoleonics, they all come out with their guns and whatever and put on the big black powder displays, which is fantastic. But it is important to show the family life within the whole structure of the Viking era, and that's, I know you do very well.
Yeah, so we concentrate as much as we can authentically on living the period, and that means we have, child members, female members. We'll cook authentically as a group together. We'll live as a group. We craft, all the time while we're at events, etc. So we're showing not just the fighting, but the actual living of the time.
The fighting's very impressive, and we'll maybe see a bit of that later on.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, folks, and for coming, and we'll catch up with you later.
No worries. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, we've come along to another table here, another Viking table, just to have a look up close and personal at a few of the more things that they would have had. Some chainmail. Viking?
Well, it would have been about 10th century Viking. It wouldn't have been the earlier stuff. It would have been more when they started to settle across Britain and when they were more on land rather than on sea. It was good against saving you from slashing attacks, and not all people would have wore it. It would either have been stole or the wealthy would have been able to afford one of these.
That would have been so much. Even swords back in that time, to put it in perspective, to own a sword back in that 10th century was the equivalent of buying yourself a very nice modern bungalow today. So not everybody had swords. So the main weapon was more the axe and the shield.
Yeah.
And there was lots of different types of axes. We have this here. This is what's this axe here?
This would be the Icelandic Danax. The Danax would be brilliant for up against shield walls, breaking down, getting through the enemy lines. So easy to use. A lot of momentum you can put behind it, deal great force and damage.
Yeah. But most of the wounds at that time, as you were saying earlier on, was more broken limbs and stuff, because they weren't really getting killed outright. I would say to get killed outright in a battle was less than an arrow hit you. was slim. You were getting
Yeah.
carted off with broken legs and arms and cracked skulls, I suppose,
Yeah.
if you weren't wearing helmets. The shields, they were an important part too, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah, they were a very important part. The shield wall was the first line of defence for the Vikings. They would have linked all their shields, and unless there was didn't collect perfectly, and there was a weak point, then the enemy would be able to push through. But if they held it strong, that their wall would stand.
Like a mini castle on the
Yep.
move. So it was, and this is what the Danax was used for, was reaching
Yep,
out over
reaching
the top.
out over
It had the longer handle on it.
Yep,
And then it meant that the spearmen could go in
and make the kills, and
make the kills and try and weaken the wall and
Yep.
keep pushing it together.
you could also hook people and pull them out of formation with
Yes.
the Danax from behind the neck or
Yeah.
the leg.
Legs, yeah, underneath. Well, listen, thanks very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day up with us here at Lyle Hill, and we'll catch up with you later, maybe in the fighting ring if you're up for it later
Yes,
on.
most definitely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
As I'm wandering around the farm, I've come across somebody that I maybe haven't seen before, well dressed and attired. Ethan, what period are you representing here?
We're representing the Confederates in the American Civil War, primarily start of 1862, from where a lot of Ulster Scots had actually immigrated from Ulster, the north of Ireland, over to the southern states in prospects of opportunity.
Yeah, there's also a big connection, even though they were far removed from home. Is it fact that here in County Antrim, the mills were turning out the grey cloth to make the Confederacy uniforms?
Oh, there were indeed quite a lot of mills actually, were producing cloth and uniform for the Confederates. Most of that ended up getting blockaded by the federal blockades through the Atlantic, but most of it was getting through in the early parts of the war. And even in Antrim itself, there are Confederate soldiers that are buried that actually come back after the war was lost to actually come back to Ireland.
Yeah, so there is a great connection.
Oh, completely.
Yeah. A bit about your kit. Obviously, you're semi-militia. A lot of the armies didn't have men in full uniforms because of the shortage of materials. So they basically were militias and made themselves up into state regiments, I suppose.
Basically, most of the equipment, there was a generalised uniform that tried to be implemented, which more of the stricter armies would have actually had from under like Stonewall Jackson and so on. However, a lot of the units, as you'd said, are militias, so they didn't have access to the equipment that were actually required. So most of them had standard grey, which they could have any cloth of, and generally a kepi or some sort of marking that makes it obvious that they're obviously Confederate. The Federals obviously in dark navy or blue, for differential reasons. The kit is primarily use of everything. Most of it actually being of British origin, being made actually in the UK and Ireland itself. For example, the snake belts, the pouches, the cross straps, everything. Most of it was being brought over or sold over.
I suppose rolling out from the Napoleonic Wars and just whatever, when people migrated, they gathered up what they thought would be useful and brought it with them, and maybe serving soldiers in the previous battles of the world, and then hand it down family over family. As we all think, this new word recycle is a big thing recently, but in fact our ancestors were the best recyclers there was on the land.
Oh, completely. Things were expensive, hard to come by, not easily made. The resources were very valuable. So entailing in that, things would have been handed down and very well cared for when handed down. Like likes of rifles, for example, for hunting purposes on farms, but also they're equally weapons and arms for military units as well, and they're just as good, especially when they're kept, especially in the Civil War. They're used on to the Enfield, 3-band Enfield, which is a percussion cap. However, you would have seen a lot of flintlocks being used, which would have been recycled, as you'd said, from earlier wars and being brought over. Because it hadn't been too long prior that American War of Independence happened, in which there was a large influx of Brown Bess and flintlock rifles actually brought in, especially French carbines as well, which were still being used by local militias prior to the war breaking out.
Well, listen, thanks very much. Hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll let you go on and join up the men. I see they're trailing a cannon around there, so they must have done something naughty for you to have them out parading all afternoon with a cannon in tow. Thanks very much.
No
Thank
problem.
you.
Thank you.
Well, it's been a bit of a reasonable long day going around seeing everybody and visiting all the different groups that's here, that's come to the muster. I've come across two gentlemen and I just see I've just arrived in time. It's tea time. So,
Well, George, it's more like Schnapp's time.
oh, snap.
You've arrived in 1916 in the fields of France, as you can see, and even the cattle speak French here. We have liberated them. But it's a pleasure to be down here for the virtual game fair, as always. It's not like being there live, but it's a pleasure to be here anyway, amongst friends.
I see you're supporting on your chest here a very nice skull and crossbones. Was that quite an honour to have this, or what's the significance behind it?
Well, the significance of the skull and crossbones, the badge on my chest, denotes me as a member of a stormtrooper battalion, and we represent Storm Battalion 5th or 5 Ruhr. We were named after the founder, really, of the stormtroopers, Captain Willy Ruhr. He had seen Russian tactics on the Eastern Front, where small groups of Russians would rush into the lines of the Germans and create as much havoc as possible. So he adapted those tactics, improved those tactics, and came up with the notion that a detachment of stormtroopers would be attached to each regiment. And what they would do is they would provide the role that tanks were portraying for the British and the French. Germany didn't have the infrastructure or the resources to produce many tanks, so they invested in creating stormtrooper battalions, training them as well as possible. They were trained on every weapon that the German army used and every weapon that their opponents used. So they would know how to use Vickers machine guns, they would know how to use the rifles, the revolvers. A stormtrooper detachment would, as fast as possible, make its way across no man's land, infiltrate the enemy trench. They would target communication areas, so they would cut wires for the radio sets and telephones, and they would penetrate as far behind enemy lines as they could. You would have one of your detachment carrying up to 30 grenades in a leather rig on his back, and that meant that if he was killed, he would fall on his front, and the other guys running up beside him would be able to scoop the grenades off his dead body to use.
Very much so, I would concur with that, because whenever we dress up in our different periods and time, and we sit around our camps at night and we're eating the food and we're experiencing the life, and it's okay for a weekend and we really get involved in it, but there's always this thing, especially in the World War I suppose, whenever we did go down and manually dig trenches and what had you here on the farm, it was whenever you were down doing that that you really did get the feel of
and it is horrific. It is horrific, and when it rains and when it's wet and when it's muddy, certainly we were going down for 2 or 3 days and digging at it. Those men lived there for 2 weeks, and then they went behind the lines to rest, for 2 weeks. But you needed that 2 weeks to recover from what you'd experienced.
Yeah, and then of course then you were exposed to the elements. There was no sort of hotels to go and park yourself in, even in the winter time. Like it was horrendous,
No, and that's one thing that we really try to get over to the public, is that all these men, regardless in what side they fought for, they were all in horrific conditions. They all wanted to go home. Not one of them, for all the bravado of we're fighting for our country, if you'd asked them when they're sitting in a trench, where would you want to be? I'd want to be at home beside the fire.
Yeah, very much so. Well, listen, guys, I'll not interrupt your tea break any longer. Enjoy the rest of the afternoon with us.
Are you sure you wouldn't like a wee drop of schnapps there, George?
Schnapps? No, I'll leave it to later on if you don't mind.
No worries, George. Catch you later.
Thank you. Well, to balance the books, we've at long last caught up with a couple of the reenactors who are dressed in the British. We've had a lot of the Germans, World War I and World War II. And it's good to see we've got a bit of a contrast here, because we have what we'd have seen knocking about home here in the home counties, as in the Home Guard, or Dad's Army as they were sometimes called. We have a gentleman here reflecting what the D-Day landing looked like in his Denison smock, his hard hat, been parachuted and gone in on the gliders on D-Day. Jamie, as every reenactor, it's all about the living and the telling the story, and I'm sure it's just the same for you.
No, absolutely. I find the biggest inspiration for me is reading the personal stories, finding exactly how the guys are feeling on the day or whatever time period it is we're doing, and you know, when we're out wearing the clothing, when we're out doing the battles and everything, we're really imagining wearing those guys' shoes, and then that just brings that whole story to life.
Yes, you do 2 or 3 interpretations. You're doing the Home Guard today, but you also do the North Irish Horse, another regiment that still exists in Northern Ireland and has a bit of panache about it.
Absolutely.
It's a very rare, still running regiment.
Yes, they were also known as the Millionaire's Own, as you say, quite a stylish regiment at the time, and they came up through North Africa and Italy, which they would have been called the D-Day Dodgers, as they never actually fought in D-Day, but they indeed actually had every bit as hard a time, if not harder, coming through a very long and hard fight through Italy as well.
Yes, they started off as cavalry, which we do an interpretation of ourselves in Living History Ireland, turning out the horses and the mules and everything. We've enjoyed taking our mobile trench, which you have helped with,
Absolutely.
round the schools and that. There again, I keep saying every time I speak to a reenactor, it's the education, isn't it? That's what's behind it all. We really want to push to our children and the generations to come, A, that we're not forgetting our forefathers, and B, we want to sort of show the horrors of war as well as the niceties of war, if there is any, to tick a box for.
Well, that's the thing. It's all about getting the fine balance there, because you can sit in a classroom and tell, you know, read off facts from a book, and a child's just going to go over their head. But once you start showing them photographs of individuals, maybe even teaching them about people that they might have been related to, that they found out about, showing them some of the artifacts, the small personal belongings, and then, as you've said as well, gradually going into the horrors of war, connecting that through a story really just brings the whole thing to life and inspires younger people, I think, then to see the importance of remembrance and to value what they've actually got now today.
Yes, like Remembrance Sunday and all, still a very poignant piece of our sort of annual homage that we pay for all different sorts of things. But the D-Days landings and things are celebrated as well. But Remembrance Sunday is still one of the big choreographed, poignant parts of our history and is as well looked after. And this is where the reenactors go back out again and draw tears, I know, you know, around the cenotaphs.
Well, absolutely, it's one of those spine-chilling moments when you're standing there in parade or whatever it is you're doing, Remembrance Sunday, and you're dressed in the kit and you see a tear come to somebody's eye because they're maybe imagining a grandfather, a father, an uncle, or what have you that fought and died and gave the ultimate sacrifice for our future.
Yeah, between the two wars, like every family in the whole of Ireland near enough had some relation somewhere along the line out, either in the Great War or in the Second World War. Gentlemen, thanks very much for your time. And we'll maybe catch up with you later on. And enjoy yourselves.
Thank you
Thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
And it'll be maybe nice next year if we get out, we can bring this all to life again in the Great Grain Fairs of Ireland down at Shane's Castle. Thanks again.
All been well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, American Panzer, 500 meter! Cougar, mother!
Hopefully there's a bit of action going on here straight away. Is an impending attack from the enemy?
It's the buzz. It's a great feeling, you know, for all the bird it does the reenactment here.
Yes.
So it is, we just keep going.
Brings it
It's the
alive.
adrenaline,
Yeah.
we're just hyped up.
Yeah, it drives. And there again, this is obviously a new addition down here.
This is a wee outpost there. Basically, we have some machine gun, there's grenades. As you can see on the horizon there's great coverage. It's
Yeah.
What else could you ask for?
It really brings it alive again, doesn't it?
So it is, yeah.
So we'll go down to see you sent the men off to the mortar pit. So we'll go down and see what they're at, and maybe pick up
Yes.
their job in the whole scale of things. Well, obviously things is happening around here quite happily. We're definitely in the background and in the way back because everyone looks so relaxed. There's no men standing really in readiness.
No, not at all.
So obviously everything can be left out, and we see these packages and we see all the boxes and all the tins and everything sitting about, which normally would be strapped to everybody in case you got
Yes,
and go hurry.
yeah.
So, but as you were saying earlier, this is more a relaxed atmosphere.
This is, well, what
You
we
want
do
to-
is, a lot of it is very much downtime.
Yes.
So it's about eating, drinking tea and coffee, listening to music, also tending to our weapons and things like that, cleaning, a little bit of training. But for reenactment, it's really about getting in the zone
Yes.
and enjoying it.
Yeah.
And also, learning from each other.
Yes.
Because we all go home and research different bits. Yeah.
I see here you've went to the extremes of getting tins and putting labels and that on. Is that researched? Is that what would have been
Yeah.
actually seen on the front?
Well, very much. Things like this come from groups maybe in England who have stuff online, and as long as you don't sell them, you're very welcome to print this stuff off, put it together. But as I say, it's about getting just into the sort of spirit of it.
Yeah.
You
So,
know?
so everything come in tins and no fancy bean signs, logos and stuff on it. Just come
That's-
basic
yeah.
wartime.
Yeah.
Turn it out. Let them know what's on the tin, and that's a
Yeah.
great thing to portray. We move on down the trench, and obviously you have the music, which is quite good.
Well, that again is just for a bit of crack.
Yes.
It's to get the ambience right.
Yes.
And
Relax everybody and put them in what have you.
Yeah.
You also then have a very big array of weapons, your grenades, your machine gun, which obviously was the worker.
Yeah.
You've got your anti-tank.
Yeah.
So
it's all owned by different members of the group, and you go away, you research. Everybody is a history buff. If you're into reenactment,
Yes.
it's because you're into history.
gentlemen, thanks for bringing me into your trench, or maybe it's my trench, but it doesn't matter. It's yours
Yeah.
for the weekend.
Yeah.
You've done a fantastic job here of dressing it all out. And obviously reenactment is just more than a job for the boys and let's go out and have a jolly. There's
Yeah.
obviously a lot of passion and thought has went into this.
Definitely. We actually come from quite a small group. There was only 6 of us, and I have to say, for something like this, there's a lead-in time of maybe 2 or 3 months of preparation, talking about what uniforms we're going to wear, putting together some props, that
Or a scenario, basically.
Or a
We try to come
scenario.
up with some sort of wee scenario of, let's see our 3 hour weekends or our day, and entertain us, but always based on a scenario of what happened maybe during the war, but so we can express it to other people, should they come.
This
Yeah.
expression thing, there again with the other reenactors, we were discussing the exact same topic. It is educational. This is what your passion is to educate the public of,
Yes.
of
Definitely.
what life was like, and
Yeah.
no matter what period of time you were rattling about in. From the cooking to
Yeah.
the weapons to the clothes to the little wee private personal things.
Yeah.
It all makes it all tell a story, doesn't it?
Very much. I think as a reenactment, a living history group, we concentrate very much on the
Life behind the name.
Yeah, where you're not fighting. That 99% of the time when you're not in battle.
Yes.
So it's the cooking, the pocket litter, what's in your jacket, what's in your bag.
Personal items, yeah.
Yeah,
What the average soldier got up to behind the name, just to get
Very
away
much.
from the battle.
Yes, it's more downtime than
it's nearly, our impression is more downtime, but I think we find as a group that the public are very interested in that.
well, certainly are. I've been to many of your displays, and you do draw the crowd. And I think it's because you put the personal items to it.
Yeah.
A lot of reenactment groups come out, and it's all about the guns and the tanks
Yeah.
and the machine guns and everything else.
Yeah.
But it's this, as we'll take a walk through later and
Yeah.
see. But it's the personal items and they're period correct. It's like a time team.
Yeah.
You've went and dug them out of the ground and brought them to the surface and put them on display, basically, isn't it?
That is it.
So we have the bread bags now.
Yeah.
But a nice wee personal touch is your shaving mirror and your shaving equipment, your
Yeah.
health and hygiene.
Well,
That's
listen,
also important in
very
in the
important.
trench.
And like lots of things in the trench, this is functional. You know, there's soap in the soap box.
Yes.
Although we have soap dodgers within our group,
Yes.
some of us use soap and clean our
Yes.
teeth. You know, and that is something that has just been taken from a barn or
Yes,
some,
yeah.
you know.
Well, listen, thanks very much for showing us through some of your items there. They're of great interest, and
No problem.
enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thank you.
And I'm going to go down and have a word with the cook, see if there's any chance of a bowl of stew later on.
Sounds good.
Well, gentlemen, it's good to see somebody doing a bit of work. There's not a woman in sight, so how do you get on with this? Do you think this is the way forward?
Absolutely.
Well, it's old-fashioned, but it works. You know, we've no ovens or anything, but with the fire going, with the knives, the peelers, you know.
It's all good. So, in the living history bit, this is also a bit of a kick for yourselves, I suppose, that you enjoy, is preparing the food and cooking it over an open fire, something which not everybody gets to do every day, maybe bar a barbecue these days. But so you're using what was available of the ground. So meat and stuff would have been quite scarce, wouldn't it?
Exactly, yeah. Well, meat would have been scarce, and he would have had to have scavenged whatever meat he could from a local farm or from enemy supplies or something like that. He would have had to obtained all his carrots and potatoes from some location as well, an enemy supply yard or again another farm.
Yeah, maybe liberated.
Liberated,
yes. So, well, when you're out with this, do you find that the public and the children enjoy this bit of it? You know, is it educational, do you think?
There's always a crowd that forms around of us when we're out camping and creating food and cooking and doing craft and working away at the set and on the trench.
So it is. So it's brilliant. Well, listen, thanks very much. Of course, give me a shout whenever it's ready. You know, don't be missing out. Somebody like me's fading away. I could do with something. Catch up with you later, guys. Thanks very much. Thank you.
No problem. Thank you.
Hello, gentlemen.
Hi, hello, how's it going?
Oh, how are you? You've got the campfire burning, I see.
Oh, yes.
So here we are. We've come to probably what will be our last interview of this virtual sort of living history that we're bringing to the Great Game Fairs of Ireland this year. And we hope you've enjoyed it so far. But I've come across sort of three images that in all my time of living history I haven't come across. And what are, and not only that, I see familiar faces, so obviously there's a bit of passion going on here.
Yeah, we like to diversify our living history activity. One day we could be Germans, but today we're actually Rogers Rangers.
Rogers Rangers. Now that would have been set in America, in the frontiers in America.
Colonial America, around the 1740s. So it is.
So the Rogers Rangers is quite famous and known. There's been films made on them and all sorts of things. The Rangers were sort of a militia, or were they a formed army? Or
They were basically made up of farmers and mountain men who came to protect their home, or valleys, or mountains from Indian attack and French attack.
And it was formed by a man by the name of Roger.
Yes.
And that's why we've got Rogers Rangers.
That's correct.
And he wrote a handbook, which I believe is still used
with the United
today.
States Rangers, that's correct. And they still use some of his survival skills, should we put it,
Yes.
are still used today, as they were very beneficial in the 1740s.
And the Rangers, as far as I can understand, were sort of, they moved the game and they were sort of pathfinders for the Redcoats, the British Army, come behind in this Indian Wars and the French. But they used entirely bushcraft, total sort of native Indian type tactics. They'd learned to work with that very quickly.
Yes, they did. They adapted enough of that of the methods used by the Indians. They always adapted the Indian footwear
Yes.
in relation to someone trying to track them.
Yes.
I don't know if they were tracking them, Rogers Rangers, or were they tracking themselves, because their footwear is exactly the same.
Yeah. And they travelled light.
Very, very light.
They were hit and run
That's it.
tacticians in the game of war, in the theatre of war.
Correct. Again, correct. That's right. Yes, the faster we move, and the later material we carried, was beneficial for everyone.
Yeah.
So we're always in front of the main body of troops coming.
Yes, and reconnaissance and checking everything out.
Yes.
And obviously the Indians being in their home territory were streaks ahead of everybody else.
Yes.
But Rogers Rangers was nearly matching that in their prime, weren't they?
Oh yes.
They were.
They had their own methods for dealing with all types of Indian attack, and at the same time attacking the Indian themselves, going on the offensive as opposed to using a defensive method.
Yes, and in the annals of history, that reportedly, you know, were the winners and losers of many's a big battle.
That's
It was
correct.
the Rangers that led the charge and saved the day, basically. Well, everyone, unfortunately, we've come to sort of the end of this living history display that we've brought to you. You'll understand that you're not going to see all of these periods that you've seen and witnessed at the game fair. But it was just to give you an example of what is available and what is potentially you could see. We hope it's given you an insight into living history and the passion and the education value and everything that goes with it that the reenactors bring together and bring to you out in the field. They want to educate everybody and give them a chance to see what it was like back in the days. So we hope you've enjoyed your time with us here. And the Great Fairs of Ireland always put everything on and put a lot of passion into it. And I hope you've seen the passion of the reenactors, which runs right through the game fair, from the food stalls, the pride of the people in their home produce, for the meats that's put on place, the arts and crafts that you see, and for all the main arena displays that is provided. And it brings everything from the country into one place for a couple of days, and you can come and soak up the atmosphere and enjoy yourself. So we look forward to next year, which comes back to normal, as the new normal as we'll know it. So I just want you all to keep safe, and we look really forward to seeing you next year if everything goes according to plan. And just keep it country in the meantime, and we'll see you soon.